So good morning, UACC. We are in the Advent season now. It's a really beautiful time of year. And, I was thinking about what I wanted to do for you these few weeks. And I was realizing that, there's a lot of messages and stories told about many of the characters in the Christmas narratives. But one person who kind of gets left out a lot is Joseph. In fact, he's someone who almost seems like he's just in the backdrop. He's just scenery. He's just in the back there. After Jesus is 10 years old, you don't see Joseph anymore. He's not around in Jesus' life, and sometimes it's easy to forget him. But there's a beautiful story of Joseph and his visitation with the angel in Matthew 1, verses 18 through 25. So for these few weeks, I think there's a lot we can learn from him, and I want to go through this passage a few verses at a time and maybe share some things with you about this wonderful man that we can learn from. So let's start by reading the first couple of verses, which is Matthew 1, 18 and 19. This is how the birth of Jesus came about. His mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph. But before they came together, she was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man, he did not want to expose her to public disgrace. He had in mind to divorce her quietly. So the first thing I want you to understand, we're going to see three characteristics of Joseph over these 3 weeks. And the first is this: Joseph was a righteous man. Now, let's look at the story. And I'm sure you know this, but I want to just refresh your memories. Joseph was most likely quite a bit older than Mary. As you know, young couples in those days, like the kind of couple that we see in all the stories of the birth of Jesus, the young couple going up to Bethlehem, and two young, a young man and a young woman, that didn't happen in those days. That's just not the way it was. Marriages were arranged for young women, and they're probably, when these marriages were arranged, in their early teens. So Mary was probably under 15, maybe as young as 12 or 13 when she was getting married at this point. The husbands had to be much older because they had to be established in a career in order to support these young girls who were then going to come along and raise these families for them. So the idea that Joseph was gone early is not unusual. This happened quite often. So this marriage was approved by both families. And Mary, being a young man, was marrying a man named Joseph, who's probably quite a bit older and established in his career as a carpenter. Now, the engagement period would have been a time where they were declared that the match has been arranged, but he hasn't brought her home yet. When he brings her home, into his home, right, because he's the older one, he has a place, he's going to bring her into his home. That's when the marriage is final. But when they're engaged, the only way to break that engagement is an actual divorce. So what happens is during this period of time when they're engaged, pretty much essentially married, it turns out that Mary is found to be pregnant. Well, you can imagine how devastating that would be to us now. I mean, can you imagine? You're engaged to a woman, and as you're engaged, you haven't got married yet, you find out she's pregnant? Or you're engaged to a man, and you find out there's some other woman carrying his baby while you're engaged to him. But it's even worse in this setting because there was a stigma attached to it. There was a shame attached to it where it would just be a terrible thing. And the implication here is very clear that at this point in the story, Joseph knows nothing. No angel has spoken to him. Nobody has told him anything. He is just like everyone else. He's going along. Now, the angel spoke to Mary, but Mary hadn't told Joseph. Joseph didn't know a thing. And suddenly he finds out, like everybody else, that his bride-to-be is pregnant. Well, being a righteous man, see, here's where it comes in. He was a righteous man. And that created a problem for Joseph because he's also a caring man. Righteousness, according to the law, demanded that he divorce her. There was no way around it. The righteous man would divorce her. And it was the only course of action that was open to him. But there were two possibilities for how he could divorce her. The first would be a public divorce. Now, a public divorce was specifically designed so that the man could release himself of all shame and dump all blame and all guilt on the woman. He could just bring her forth publicly and say, see what she's done to me. She's pregnant. She did this. It's all her fault. She committed adultery. The woman might even be stoned after such a public divorce. But there was also the possibility to do a private divorce. In other words, it would be a quiet one. It would be witnessed only by two people. It was still shameful, but it wasn't as bad, and it didn't draw attention as much to the woman. So Joseph, being a righteous man, chose to do what was right according to the law. And he tempered his righteousness with compassion, not wanting to harm Mary or to cause her any further disgrace. You can see how his heart was soft. Now remember, again, at this point, he's not aware of any claim that this child is the Messiah, that this child was a child of the Holy Spirit, that this was a virgin birth, that Mary has been faithful to him. He doesn't know any of that. He also doesn't know that anyone has claimed the fatherhood of this child. All he knows is that this girl he was going to marry is pregnant, and he has chosen to do the righteous thing, but he has tempered that righteousness with compassion. You see, he learned that righteousness according to the law must be tempered with grace and love. They must go hand in hand. And if he did not have that capacity for recognizing righteousness in that way, I don't think God could have ever used him for this purpose at this time. As I think about this, I realize that God uses people like Joseph for his kingdom work. People who know that obedience to the letter of the law without compassion leads not to righteousness, but to pride, legalism, and judgment. This will be important later on in the story in a couple of weeks when we talk more about this, but for now, I would challenge you all to think about what you might do or feel in this situation. How angry you might be if you found yourself in this situation where the person you're engaged to had done this to you. How much you might want to publicly put the blame on her or him and vindicate yourself. How powerfully you might feel pulled to defend your own reputation and your own honor, instead of thinking about being not only righteous, but being compassionate and merciful. And then I'd ask you to explore your own life and see if there's a place where you might be acting with righteousness, but forgetting about compassion. You know, when we learn to balance these two things, it's very powerful, and it opens us up to God in ways that maybe we could never imagine. Advent is the time to realize that God did that to us. He treats us with both righteousness and compassion, both. And that's what Christ's coming means to us. It allows us to change our perception, even of what it means to be righteous, so that like Joseph, we might be used in wonderful ways to do his work. So God bless you, and think through these things this Advent season and spend some time in prayer and ask yourself if you have understood the connection between righteousness and compassion. Have a great day.